right, so welcome to the School Board Candidates Forum. I'm Sid Harth, I'll be your moderator for today. The candidates will give a 1.5-minute opening statement in the order that they put their numbers in. So, in the order that they're putting in right now. So, from Chris to Alex to Kathy and onwards. So, Shader is a timekeeper, and he'll be keeping track with his cards up there. And after that, we'll have 2 advanced questions that were given to the candidates beforehand. They'll have to know time to answer those, and then we'll end the closing statements in the reverse order in which they gave their opening statements in. So we'll start with Mr. Boyd. Your opening statement. Your time starts now.
Yes. Can you read the question?
It's your opening statement.
Oh, my opening statement. Okay. Thank you very much. Quiero darles la bienvenida a todos los que hablan español. Yo también soy un candidato hispano. 我要欢迎这些人说中国话。我从小时候说中国话，非常爱中国文化。Finally, to the great majority, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. It's a big opportunity for us to talk about a really good time. A lot of good things are happening that merge the main topic of today's debate, special education and wellness and high achievement. As we all know, we have a new Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, which supersedes the previous goals that the federal government had set. And a lot of that really lifts and changes our understanding of special education. It's no longer special services for 10% perhaps of the population. ESSA defines special students as pretty much a lot of other students, and it makes the point of my message, which is when it comes to special services, let's think in terms of all of us. We are all special students.
Mr. Sharf, you have 4.
My message today is for my community. I know what it's like to be choked, spit on, hit in the head with the ball, and to be sent to the principal's office so many times that you have your own chair. I also know what it's like to take a field trip with 30 other 5th graders to colonial America and be excited about history. I know what it's like to try and write notes and listen to the teacher, only to miss the whole subject. And I also know what it's like to have a teacher who makes lecture notes available for all her students in the class. I know what it's like to be assigned to a team project with people you don't know, only to have them exclude you from participating. I also know what it's like to have a teacher who provides an opportunity to come and present to him during office hours instead. I know what it's like to be excluded by other kids in middle school and told, don't hang around my friends because you aren't like them. And I also know what it's like to have a group of friends in high school who walk together to town and country every day for lunch. I know what it's like to get so anxious or depressed you can't get out of bed and go to school for a week. And I also know what it's like to be excited to learn about something you're interested in. I know what it's like to want to give up, and I also know what it's like to stay strong. As long as there are people advocating for you, giving you a chance and listening to you, you'll be okay. I'm running for school board because I've been there, I know what it's like, and I'm there for you.
All right. Can candidates use a microphone if you have audio, please? So, Ms. Jordan, if you have a microphone. Just turn it on.
Hello?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to PTAC, CAC, and PAS for hosting this forum today, and to the PTA also for providing green. Like so many of us here, I came from somewhere else, originally from the East Coast, Philadelphia. I came out here to play tennis at Stanford, and also to get an education. We chose to live in Palo Alto because of the excellent public schools. I have one child who graduated from Palo Alto Unified, and I have one still in middle school in the district. As befitting a school board candidate, I actually do have children, and I do have children in the district. So I have a stake in making the district the best that it can be, which is why I've been working hard for the past 18 months, requesting the school district to improve itself, and also because I feel our children are worth it. While we have a great school district and a lot to be proud of, it does have some problems. and I believe we have to acknowledge those problems so that we might be able to fix them. For example, we need to manage our finances responsibly, rather than making $6 million blunders here and $5 million errors there. We need to make sure our students receive their mandated instructional minutes instead of allowing a schedule that's 21 days short of instruction over a 180-day school year. We need to ensure all of our children meet A through G requirements upon graduation. Instead, over 30% do not. In short, we desperately need our school board to provide some oversight, and change is needed on the school board to provide that oversight. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Ashley, the floor.
Hi, I'm Stacy Ashland, and what some of you might not know about me is my background before I became a child advocate in this district. I have a bachelor's in math and computer science from the University of Illinois and a master's degree in computer science from Virginia Tech. I had a career in the software industry that moved me out to Palo Alto 26 years ago. And I had the good fortune of being able to quit that high-paying tech job to take care of my child and educate him in this district, as well as help other parents learn the ropes of navigating special education for their students. I've been advocating in this district for students and families for 18 years approximately. I've been elected and served on 2 different site councils at elementary and high school level. I've been appointed to City of Palo Alto Parks and Rec Commission, where we worked on safe routes to school, including not just bicycles, but also pedestrian walkways, and served on the Coverly Committee, which is jointly owned between the district and the city. I've served on the community, along with CAC and PAS, as well as at the CELPA one at the county level, Project Safety Net developmental assets, working towards academic inclusion as well as social inclusion, so that all of our students are happy, healthy, wealthy, and wise.
All right, 1 second. We're trying to get the mic issues resolved. All right, does that work now? All right. Mr. Dauber, the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Dauber. I want to thank the CAC and PTA Council for hosting this event. I'm the incumbent president of the school board, and so a classic question for someone seeking re-election is, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? The answer to that question is absolutely yes, even though there's still much work to be done, and I'm looking forward to doing that work in the next 4 years. That's why the Palo Alto Weekly endorsed me last week, saying that we have the strongest school board in decades, that we are at the best place as a district that we've been in the last 10 years, and said that I have been a force for positive change and a strong leader. And that's why the Palo Alto Daily Post also endorsed me. I ran it 4 years ago on some key promises. I won't go through all of those, but one of the things that I have brought to the district, tried to bring to the district, is a vision of schools that serve every child. And that's a particularly important promise for students in special education and students who come from underrepresented minorities and from backgrounds that don't have the kinds of resources that many of our students have. I've been a staunch advocate and a hard worker on those issues. Before I even joined the school board, I stood up for students who were bullied the way that Alex talked about, and pressed for cooperation with the federal government on civil rights. I guess I'm out of time. I'm not sure whether that's, I'm not sure how we're doing with timekeeping, but I really look forward to this event. I've looked forward to this event in the past, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Darup, you have the floor.
Hi, my name is Shaunik Darup. I came straight from the airport. I was at a wedding for a friend who I went to gun with, actually. So it turned into somewhat of a PAUSD alumni reunion last night. And as we were talking late into the night, I really was reminded of the diversity that we have in our schools, the different paths that each of us took to reach success. And we took very circuitous paths, everybody did. The one thing we had in common was really the one thing that enabled us each to succeed, which was the strong educational foundation laid by PAUSD. You know, the commitment to empower every student to reach their own individual potential. It's the one thing that binds us, the one thing that really pushed us to reach great heights. And it's the very reason you chose to send your students here, your children. It's the very reason my parents moved here to send me to these schools. It's the reason my wife and I, we also went to high school together. The reason that we're going to raise our future kids in the district here. My commitment to this district is very personal. And it's not just because I'm going to raise my future kids here. It's because everything I have, everything I have done, everything good I've done with my life so far. And I'm a litigator. I represent people. I represent their rights. All the good I've done has been because of the foundation laid here. It's because of PAUSD. And so you can bet I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure every student has that same opportunity for lifelong success. And that's why I'm here today. That's why I'm running for school board.
All right, so we'll now begin with the advanced questions given. The first one that was given to the candidates, I'll read it out right now. PAUSD's reputation is steeped in academic outcomes. What is the district's academic obligation towards students who don't have the benefit of long-term tutors, academic acceleration programs, but show up ready to learn? How does the district govern with accountability and transparency to comply with state standards and with the responsibility to advance students in this environment? Mr. Boyd, to the floor. You have 1.5 minutes.
This is a hugely important question. Outcomes. We have a unique mix. It's some of the most brilliant people. All of our students, whether you go to Gunn or Talley or Green or Fletcher or any of the schools, are really outstanding. They're wonderful, positive students. And we really, if we look at what we can do so much better. I have here in our hands this CAC plan, community plan. If the Palo Alto Unified School District, if the board had implemented this plan, we would be so far ahead of where we are today. But we owe brilliant kids and every single student I define as brilliant a fantastic education here. An education that's world-class, that's not measured against other states, but is measured against the world standards. And I think we can provide that.
You have 1/2 minute left.
Okay.
If you're done.
I'll just stop at that.
All right. Mr. Sharp, to the floor.
As a public entity, PAUSD has an academic obligation to all students. Its obligation is towards providing tutors and resources comparable to what other students have access to, or to limit the environmental pressure and need for outside help beyond what the school provides. Getting a tutor should not be a necessary step to successfully completing a class. The district also has an obligation to teach emotional intelligence, since success is not just measured by academics. In order to govern with accountability and transparency, not only does the information need to be publicly accessible, but it needs to be distributed in a district newsletter or on the district website and information to the public to inform the public what is being done. More detailed and comprehensive information should be provided that informs the community what issues the district is addressing and how they are addressing them, so that community members don't have to file a Public Record Act to find out. The district should be sure that parents know what programs and services are available to help students and solicit more help from smart and talented people we have in our community. Advanced students are provided many opportunities above grade level. For example, Pally introduced multivariable calculus. However, it's hard to jump between lanes, and there needs to be an easy way for high-achieving students to bridge lanes. I also recommend differentiated instruction, which helps all students.
All right. As a reminder, we'd like candidates to use their microphones so that we can pick up on your audio during the live stream. Ms. Jordan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Palo Alto Unified has an obligation to educate all of its students, regardless of where they are on the academic spectrum. It will never be the case that all students enter kindergarten at exactly the same spot on that academic spectrum, regardless of the resources or education that their families bring to the table. We need to meet the children where they are and assist them to make progress at their own level and at their own pace. Those who don't have the benefit of tutors and outside programs, yes, will potentially be at a disadvantage to other students. This is not something that Palo Alto Unified can control. However, Palo Alto Unified can control the instruction that it provides, can work to provide quality instruction. and can be backed by testing and evaluation to see how well that instruction is being absorbed. For special education students, Palo Alto Unified has obligations to those students under the law to help them make progress academically. And Palo Alto Unified itself has said that its special education program has not been in compliance with the law. That must change. Our district must adhere to the laws. For advanced students, Palo Alto Unified must also meet them where they are and help them to make academic progress. We have an obligation to them as well. Rather than seeking to make some of these situations out as zero-sum, instead, in my view, we should be looking at how we can help all of our children progress, be proficient, and excel.
All right. Ms. Ashland, you have the floor.
Thank you. I have raised a child all the way through on an IEP, starting in pre-K and continuing through graduation from Gunn High School. So I have firsthand experience as well as experience in advising other families and advising the district on how to best fulfill the services under an IEP. The district has an obligation to educate all of its students and to graduate from our high school and to have a chance at achieving the A through G requirements. That is our obligation. We will never stop the influx of money and the use of outside tutors, but we do have an obligation to scaffold the students who are not at grade level and support them, not just in early identification in elementary school, but throughout middle and high school and graduation as well. Lastly, cutting off the top for advanced students doesn't help the struggling students. Our students have a chance, deserve that opportunity to have advanced AP classes in the humanities as well as in the sciences, and should not grow up like some of our young people in our district and feel that they were stupid because they didn't take AP physics. A lot of our children are twice exceptional, and it is imperative that we recognize that and educate our community that children can have strengths as well as deficits, and one does not negate the other.
Mr. Dauber, you have the floor.
So the district's obligation to all students is to support them in meeting their potential. The mechanism for accountability for that is the state standards tests, which enable us to assess the district's performance against that obligation and also how the district is doing with respect to other districts in the state of California. And the fact is that in some areas, for some students, we are not doing as well as we should be when compared to other districts across the state, even districts that are less well-resourced than ours is. So there is room for improvement here. I think the other obligation that the district has that's really critically important is making the best use of district resources to meet the needs of students. One of the things that I've really tried to do as a board member is to move towards a more data-driven and more intentional approach to how we use district resources. Because what's critically important with scarce resources is that we really understand which of the programs that we have that's working and which aren't. So one of the things that I would like us to continue to do and to improve at doing is really measuring the impact of the work that we're doing and making sure that we're spending those dollars with the maximum effectiveness. Nobody disagrees that we have an obligation to all students. Really the question is making sure that we exercise that obligation in the most effective and efficient way that we can.
All right. Mr. Dar, you have the floor.
The goal of a public education system is, as everyone has said, I think, is to empower every student to reach their individual potential. And that comes with two obligations. The first obligation is equal outcome. We want and we need to have all of our students be able to develop those same critical thinking skills, the creativity, the resilience, everything that we would like to instill within our students when they graduate. And that comes with an obligation to equal access, making sure that every student has equal access to learning. Not just equal access to the same learning, but equal access to quality learning, which means adapting the learning environment to suit their individual needs. Now, the way we can do that, as Ken mentioned, is through data. Examining the data and finding where there are gaps so we can target individualized resources, but also making sure that we have teams at all levels of administration, both in the district level and site level, who are reviewing data, examining data, and having a constant flow of information So on a district level, we know where those gaps are and how to target them. We also need to make sure that we are sharing this information with the community, because transparency is key. Making sure that our parents know not only how we're teaching and how we're adapting that learning environment, but also being completely upfront with where those gaps are so that we as a community can come together and plug those holes. Finally, accountability was a part of the question, and accountability is really achieved twofold. One is Ken mentioned and others have mentioned measurable goals, making sure that there are continuous evaluations at all levels of the administration, and also through a general counsel, through compliance, making sure that we are complying with the laws.
All right. The second question we give to the candidates, I'll read as follows. Special education is already addressing transparency with the community, collecting data and feedback, and decision setting. Parents and teachers report that students with disabilities are not consistently receiving the specialized instruction, accommodations, and modifications to meet their individualized needs. General educators are asking for more support. What is your view on district children's capacity to support students with disabilities, and how do you measure that? Please also speak to the needs in our middle and high schools. Mr. Boyd, you have the floor.
Hello. I think, I don't know how many people here are sports fans, but if you enjoy soccer, you have to know to make the goal, you have to be aware, not of where the ball is today, but where the ball is going to be, and manage to put your foot there and kick the goal in. And I think this is what I want to bring to the table. We have basically a situation where special needs students are just not receiving the services that they're entitled to. But that's the past. The future is a much higher goal. The future that we have to measure ourselves is not to measuring existing data to do better. That's of no use whatsoever. It's really, how are we going to deliver education in a mode where educational technology has changed, in a mode where there is a new federal law, Every Student Succeeds Act, which requires us to really work with every single student. And we're so far away today from where we should be internationally, and even compared to other states, that we are not collecting data, we're not meeting people's needs, and there's no way really to reform the system unless we change it.
Mr. Scharf, you have the floor.
The district has a lot of money and the capacity to support students with disabilities, but that has not happened. They need to fix things and look at what is actually useful to help. For example, there was a lot of money spent on the wellness centers. How useful are they, and are they serving their purpose? I have heard that they're used by popular girls as a place to hang out. Data should be collected on the demographics of who is using the centers and what for, and not just assume the interventions is working. Providing more support to general educators will be an effective thing. Students are more likely to go to teachers they know and are familiar with compared to strangers in wellness centers. Teachers should be given materials to support and help. Teachers should also go through social emotional training. It's a useful skill for everyone, not just the students. There are a lot of things that you can use to measure success. You can measure grade improvement, standardized test performance, the number of compliance complaints, and if the students achieved their IEP goals in the least restrictive environment. If goals were not met, you need to understand why progress is not being made rather than removing the goals. Data needs to be collected on whether interventions are resulting in progress and compared across different school sites. Co-taught classes in middle and high school allow more students to be included, but it also limits students' access to many higher level and lane classes that have no such support.
Ms. Jordan, you have the floor.
Thank you. On this topic, I wanted to cite a Palto Weekly article reporting on the Associate Superintendent asking for an additional $2.4 million over 2 years for Palto Unified Special Education Program. The reason cited for requesting those additional funds was that Palto Unified's Special Education Program was needed to come into legal compliance. also to reduce litigation with families, which means that the special education program is not in compliance and may still not be in compliance. I would measure the district's capacity to support special education students by looking at a few key indicators. According to data that was passed out at an LCAP meeting, only 24.6% of our students with disabilities are meeting A through G requirements upon graduation. That means that 75% are not meeting A through G requirements. To me, that's a dismal statistic, especially when I learned from a state study on the topic that of those with disabilities, 60 to 80% of those students do not have intellectual disabilities, which means they can learn. So how can it be that 75% of our students with disabilities do not meet A through G requirements? To me, it means they're not getting the support and services they're entitled to under the law, and not making the academic progress that the law calls for in the recent Andrew Y. Supreme Court decision. I believe the board's job is to make sure the special education program is getting the resources it needs, doing the actual work to make sure the students progress.
Ms. Ashland, you have the floor.
We are on our fourth special ed director since I started advocating in this district. And every time I have been told we need to do more with less. The resources in this district need to be allocated accordingly so that upon graduation from our high schools, when that state survey comes to your mailbox asking if your child is incarcerated, you can say, my district did what it needed to do, so that it would not be an expectation a year after graduating from PAUSD. We've made great progress in inclusion and in co-teaching. Free, appropriate public education under an IEP is a subjective thing. What is appropriate? You're not entitled to what's best. You're entitled to what's appropriate. We need a collaborative approach with parents as partners, not adversaries. When we reduce math lanes, like we are in our third year at Gunn, we need to increase the scaffolding so that the rate of failure is not increasing. We need to train our case managers to track to the IEP goals and measure progress 3 to 4 times a year so that we can course correct. All children are capable of making academic progress, and if we are doing this on a timely basis, we will have the opportunity to do that, but we need to dedicate the resources accordingly and not continue saying we need to do more with less in special education.
Mr. Dauber, you have the floor.
Well, actually, the board, with my full support, this summer said that we need to do more with more in special education. We actually received a request for $2.5 million in increased funding for special education over the next 2 years and funded the first year of that request, which I think was $1.5 million. So the reality is that this board is completely committed to whatever funding is needed in order to meet the needs of students in special education, and that I'm not just saying that, we've put dollars against that. In terms of where the district's capacity is, one of the things the board asked the special education department to do is to come back with data about where the gaps are. In May, the district staff came back with survey results that demonstrate, I think, some places where there's success. IEP meetings are getting a fairly high level of satisfaction, and also dissatisfaction, follow-up after IEP meetings. Making sure that parents get IEP progress reports along with report cards, which only half the parents said that they were getting. Better support for training for teachers and in inclusion. So there are some specific areas that have been identified and that are being worked on, and they're being worked on with the kinds of resources that are needed in order to make those changes. And I'm completely committed to making sure that we stay that course.
Mr. Dara, you have the floor.
So one of the ways that capacity is limited in this district is because of a more traditional distinction between general ed and special ed. And that's sort of the opposite of what we're going for, which is inclusion. This is especially noticeable at our middle schools and our high schools, where you have sort of a tight master schedule. You have a number of different teachers per student, which makes it a lot more difficult for teachers to actually individualize learning to their students. So one of the key areas to fix that, to increase our capacity, is professional development. And that professional development really is targeted, should be targeted, to delivering, teaching teachers how to specifically deliver instruction as to individual disabilities. Increasing collaboration between general ed and special ed teachers so that when there are students who are in both courses who are mainstream, the general ed teachers have the learning and the skills and the abilities to actually adapt the learning environment for those students to make a more inclusive learning environment. Now, one of the ways to do that is also not just having professional development workshops, but also bringing professionals into the classroom. And that's one thing that the district is on the path towards with the $2.4 million that Ken just mentioned. One of the things the district is going to do is to bring specialists into the classroom. And that's key to really bridging that gap and increasing the capacity of our educators to teach to special education students. Now, communication is also extremely important, as I said, between special ed and general ed teachers, as is ensuring that general ed students have a feeling of an environment that is supportive of them, special ed students, I'm sorry, because that is the kind of environment in which they build a social network, a strong social network that will support them for the rest of their lives.
We'll now move to audience questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond, and I'll read the first one as follows. Board policy addresses discipline in all PAUSD schools. In your opinion, does PAUSD policy address restorative measures appropriately and take into consideration culturally relevant behavior and behaviors of people with disabilities? Please explain what your understanding of PAUSD discipline practices as it relates to students with disabilities and HUR students. As a board member, what restorative discipline methods will you support? Mr. Boyd, you have the floor.
I think this is a very important question because discipline is taken so negatively within the Palo Alto Unified School District. It's a series of don't and then punish, when in fact we need to work towards a very positive way of accomplishing goals to prevent the problems from occurring. There's not a single kid out there that I know that wants to misbehave or break the rules, but we haven't given them appropriate wellness training. We haven't given them emotional IQ since kindergarten. We haven't taught them empathy and to get along with their fellow people. So by the time they get to high school, we've gone way beyond bullying into really horrific forms of extreme behavior. So I think the approach to discipline is really a failure. It leads to a very cruel approach to behavior modification by principals, and that will hurt all children.
Mr. Sharp, you have the floor.
From my experience, there is no supportive or beneficial measures of discipline. It's all punitive, as Chris was saying. And that, from my experience, some of the things they punished were things that were out of the student's control. So like, from one of my medications, one of the side effects I had was bad gas, and I got kicked out of the classroom for having bad gas, even though it was a side effect of a medication that I had no control over. And so I think there is a very negative feeling to punishment and the environment around it that students face, and especially students with disabilities face. And I think there needs to be more awareness of what problems students have as opposed to just punishing them for something that they might not even be at fault for.
Ms. Jordan, you have the floor.
Thank you. In a public school district, the Ed Code defines discipline. And for students with disabilities, I had a comment that recently was misquoted and taken out of context, which I'd like to explain. The context of what I was discussing is that for students with disabilities in disciplinary situations is that schools must provide services to these students. And they must properly implement their IEPs. Not providing services to students with disabilities is unacceptable, and thus schools are really the ones that should be subject to some discipline when services are not provided, rather than the students. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland, you have the floor.
We have a disproportionality problem. Historically underrepresented minorities, as well as students with special needs, are suspended either formally or informally at a higher percentage than students that do not fall into those categories. When I say informally, I say frequently the parents are told, your child needs to come home, your child wants to go home, and it is not recorded as a suspension. This practice is very common in our district as well as others. One of the things we've learned in this district in the past recent years is that behavior is a form of communication. This is something that our pedagogical approaches need to be continued with professional development so that it is not always about stopping behaviors, but it is about teaching pragmatic language and positive communication and social inclusion in our schools.
Mr. Dauber, you have the floor.
I see discipline as part of a larger story about how we enable students to be safe at school and help teach students how to be respectful to each other at school and to live in community with each other at school. So I have supported the extensive social emotional learning curriculum that we have in our district, and also supported an effort which is a multi-year effort to build a common K-12 social emotional learning curriculum that will give students a common language for talking with each other as they move through our various schools up through high school, and then also give middle and high schools a common way of speaking with students that they know that they'll understand because they have a common background in that. So I think this is restorative justice, discipline, social emotional learning curriculum are all part of the way that we help students come to respect each other and build a strong community at school.
Mr. Dara, you have the floor.
Punitive measures are fairly ineffective at stemming any long-term behavior. We know this. And so it's important to look at the underlying behavioral causes. And that means focusing on the fact that mental health and mental wellness is really tied intimately with the issue of discipline. When we start addressing those issues, which we have been doing, whether it's with wellness centers, social emotional learning curriculum, that's how we begin to stem the issue of discipline because we're addressing the root cause to begin with. But it is important to note that historically underrepresented students and special needs students are disproportionately subject to punitive measures and discipline. And so what the district should be doing more of is hiring more historically underrepresented teachers and staff to make sure that there is a perspective that teachers and staff are coming from that is common with students who are affected, as well as making sure that we have more unconscious bias training, not just when we hire teachers, but on an ongoing basis.
All right, the next audience question I'll read out loud. If elected, what is one thing that you would do to make our families with students that are bused into the Palo Alto Unified Schools feel more welcome and included in the Palo Alto School District? Educational conversations, activities, and community. Mr. Boyd, you have 1 minute to respond.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question?
If elected, what is one thing that you would do to make our families with students that are bused into the Palo Alto schools feel more welcome and included in the Palo Alto School District? Educational conversations, activities, and community. You have 1 minute.
That is actually a very good question, and it also is something, since a lot of our people are immigrants, that immigrant children feel here from other than just bused children. But essentially, as far as building wellness, we have to move into building a community of friends, a community that is as a family. In China and in Chinese, there is the word for everyone, and it's called 大家. It's very different to everyone in English, which means each one of us. It means the big people as part of a family. And this is what we have to do for all students, and that will take care of the bus problem. Did I go over time? Okay.
All right. Mr. Sharf, you have the floor.
I think with the students that are bused over, there's not any programs or good ways to integrate them into the schools, and they feel left out. And so I think we are, at Pali at least, we already have team building days and field days, and that I think taking a part of that day to encourage the integration of these students from outside and get them included with the students that are already here is very important. And I think that, training people to accept outsiders is important, because if things are just left the way they are, they won't change. And so you need to actively pursue changing things.
Thank you. One of the things I would like to see us look at to see whether it could be helpful in integrating the students who are bused into the community is childcare. We had a mom raise to us the issue of early morning childcare because of early morning work schedule. And also childcare on the other end after school, whether or not we could help integrate these students by providing childcare that meets people's needs due to their work schedule, which can vary from a standard one. And so that's one thing I'd like to look at. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
Since Kathy said childcare, I'll talk about transportation. When students are bused into our district, one of the things that they frequently miss out on is extracurricular activities that occur after school, evenings, and weekends, including sports, even participating on a science project in the middle school level and other group projects at the high school level. The number one thing I would address is transportation, and this could be achieved in a number of ways. Shuttle buses, even private services like Lyft and Uber. But as long as our children have one and only one way to get between school and home, they will be left out of the fabric of our community. That's the number one thing I would address is transportation.
We'll hold on to the applause, please. So, no possible for candidates for candidate materials in this room, please. Mr. Dauber?
So the district is taking some steps in this area. Family engagement specialists is one of them. So I think that this is, and there are also some other programs that are focused on helping these students get to and from school. In my view, the most critical thing that we can do to promote integration is to work on the achievement gap. So that, because there's nothing that makes students feel less integrated in school than not being supported and achieving to their full potential. And so I think that it's important to have integration, it's important to have these, but it's critically important that when students come to school, no matter from what background they have and where they're coming from, that they can expect to be helped to meet their full potential. And I think that's the critical step that we need to take, and I think that's going to lead to much more sense of belonging and connection than any other steps that we can take.
Mr. Dara?
Transportation, childcare, educational infrastructure are all critical portions of that, but it all stems from the same thing, which is the board. At the end of the day, many families, especially those in East Palo Alto, don't have the same kind of access to board meetings that the rest of the Palo Alto community does. And in fact, most working parents find it very difficult to come to board meetings that are once every 2 weeks and tend to go till 11 p.m. That is an issue of access. And so to fix that, or at least ameliorate the issue, the one thing that the board should do is think about having informal group sessions that aren't official board meetings, but 1 or 2 board members could go to different parts of the community, including to East Palo Alto, and sit down with families to discuss what they have to say about their children's education, because they have every right, just the same right that everybody else in Palo Alto has, to dictate the direction of the district and the board, but they don't have a say in terms of their vote, because they don't vote in Palo Alto in PAUSD. And so it's critically important that the board provide not just a choice, but an opportunity for those parents to also engage with the district's future.
All right. The next question I'll read out loud. What is an example of a program or initiative that you would work to protect and or provide more support for us in the educational equity and access space? Mr. Boyd, you have the floor.
I think that it's right in front of us. It is this wonderful community advisory committee. They've put out plans, but somehow over the last 4 years, the board has never implemented these plans. However, we have to keep in mind that this is a moving target, because the moving target has gotten further away from us. We now have to do much better. It's no longer good enough to meet that plan. We have to start working on ESSA, which means really bringing kids to their full potential, changing the curriculum, and restructuring the school community. And I think, since we're all running for the board, the biggest change that has to occur is the definition of a board member has to be someone out of their seats, in the community, willing to make a commitment 24/7 wherever there is a problem. And I think you need to measure that
and set that as essential to success in the future.
Mr. Sharp?
I think the most important program and education tool that was recently implemented is the social emotional learning. I think that that is as important as any of the other education you can get in the school, and that learning how to function in society, how to manage stress, anger, anxiety, these things are very important to be successful, and that these traits have been found to be a huge indicator of how successful people are in the workplace, and that providing these educational opportunities will help students succeed much better than otherwise they would without them.
All right. Ms. Jordan?
Yes, thank you. If there was one program that I would seek to protect, it would be early identification and early intervention for helping with both students with disabilities, but also to identify any deficits that might be present for students entering kindergarten, and even prior to kindergarten, if possible, the Springboard to Kindergarten program, if that could be expanded beyond what it is now. Given that proficiency scores in elementary school predict whether or not students will graduate meeting A through G requirements, it's critically important that we identify students early on for deficits or for disabilities, and that we work to support them and provide services as early as possible. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
One of the things we know about HUR students as well as students with special needs is that those problems and those challenges don't necessarily go away as our students move on to middle and high school. The number one program that I would increase support for is AVID, Advancement via Individual Determination. I would increase resources for the AVID program on par with the way it is supported in the Menlo Atherton High School as well as in the Mountain View Los Altos High School District, so that all students on AVID are put on college track and given that opportunity to take the advanced classes and get the GPA needed that will give them opportunities for college. It is possible. We need to support that program to the degree that is successful.
Mr. Dauber?
The key question to ask about any program in order to nominate it for this status of the most important is what are the benefits and what are the costs? And the fact is that for many of our programs, we don't know the answer to that question. And so it's not possible to say that the dollars spent on that program are dollars that should be protected as against other programs. This is an area where the board and the district are making progress. There's still a ways to go. I would point as an opportunity to dyslexia, which was the subject of a board presentation this past Tuesday. 20% of our students or so are suffering from dyslexia. And so there's an enormous opportunity to put into place programs that support all of those students. There aren't many chances you get to do some specific interventions that are going to lift the performance and the access to education of 20% of our students, and so that's a particularly exciting one for me.
Mr. Dar?
The most important thing that we can do going forward is to expand out the pockets of innovation that we have in this district. So we have a ton of innovative programs that really focus on integrated curricula, on authentic learning, on real-life application that are focused on building students to have the lifelong skills that they need. So they're lifelong learners. And that's not just an aspirational skill. I mean, it's really practical, I think, as Alex identified, especially now that we have industries that are no longer as stagnant as they used to be. They are so interdisciplinary. Lifelong learning is a necessity moving forward. And so we have these pockets, these great programs like Connections at JLS, like BEAM, like Advanced Authentic Research, like Social Justice Pathways. But those opportunities are offered inconsistently because they're not offered at every school. So doing what we can on an institutional level to really provide the support teachers need to expand those programs out to make sure that those innovative programs are being offered consistently at all of our schools and making sure that all of our students have the same opportunity to access that high quality education.
All right. The next audience question is as follows. When the board approved the district equity plan earlier this year, there were board members who suggested monthly updates on progress towards closing the achievement gap. 3 parts of the question. 1, do you agree with the suggestion? 2, please share specifically what kind of data you think should be shared in these monthly updates. And 3, who would you want to hear from? Mr. Board, you have the floor.
The monthly achievement gap is something that we need to monitor more than just monthly. But it's not going to come about unless we put an actual means to changing the status quo. Now, there are any number of ways that we can use new technologies to teach students more efficiently. And these have been proven to work at Stanford, in studies done in New York City, just taking their educational software and installing it in New York City, really hardcore problem schools. Suddenly the students start gaining traction in their academic progress. And I think that what we need to measure is what we need to change and how to change it, and think more like a corporation. Because if we try to optimize what isn't working when so much outside is changing, we're going to miss our goal completely.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question again?
Yes.
Sorry, it's very long.
When the board approved the district equity plan earlier this year, there were some members who suggested that monthly updates on progress towards closing the achievement gap. 1, do you agree with those suggestions? 2, please share specifically what kind of data you think should be shared in these updates. And 3, who would you want to hear from? I can repeat it if need be, but
I can
okay.
repeat it again, that's for time.
So I think monthly updates are a bare minimum. I think the more frequent the updates, the more data points you have, the more accurate your information is going to be. So I think any less than monthly would lead to inaccurate data or to not enough data points to measure stuff as accurately as possible. And I think that some of the things you can measure are grades, obviously, how they perform on standardized tests, and I think for IEPs, are they meeting their goals? Are the students doing what they set out to do? And these are important issues.
Ms. Jordan?
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to remember the 3 goals. I think environmental equity for the equity plan. Environmental equity, I believe something academic focused, and personnel equity, I think, were the 3 goals that were centered in the equity plan. And I do agree that it would be helpful to have very regular updates, monthly updates if possible. And in terms of what I'd like to see and what I'd like to hear from, I would want to focus on the academic portion of that equity plan. I think that would be most important in addressing any potential deficits that were identified early on, to see how those deficits are progressing, whether or not instruction is being absorbed, and for both students with deficits as well as students with disabilities. So that is what I'd like to focus on. Thank you.
Ms. Ackland?
I do agree with the suggestion on monthly reports, but I do believe it should be done in the teaching teams at the school level. One of the things about the data is that we have so few students in our district that identify as African American, and when those numbers are below a certain level at a school, it is not reported in the data because it would identify the student. Additionally, multiracial data is lumped together, so it can be very hard to determine at the district level, but at the site level, those updates would include progress on the students' goals, as well as a focus on emphasizing the strengths and the interests of the students. A lot of our educational data is based on their deficits. I would want to hear from the people on the instructional team that are working with those students on a daily basis, and ensure that we're making progress on those goals at the school level.
Mr. Dauber?
I certainly support frequent updates to the board on closing the achievement gap. One of the scarcest resources in a school district is attention, and focusing attention on an issue makes it more likely that we'll solve it. I think a critical change that we need to make in this area is to locate accountability for progress in the site level principals. and that what we should do is, and I've had conversations with the superintendent about this, I think he's agreeable to this, is to set those goals at the site level and to hold site leaders accountable for making progress on them, and also to make sure that they have access to the resources that they need in order to make that progress, and ultimately to hold the superintendent accountable. I think seeing progress on the achievement gap as part of the core mission and core job of our senior leadership and senior managers is really critical to making progress.
Mr. Dar?
The tricky thing about how often we want to look at data is that if the data points are too close together, then we don't get a full picture of any trends that develop. If they're too far apart, we can't have any sort of course correction. So I think a month is a reasonable amount of time, maybe twice every quarter. But regardless, constant and consistent evaluation is really key to making sure that we are supporting students and we're getting a full picture of where there are gaps. Now, the kind of data to look for is data that's been identified at the state level and in the equity plan, things like test scores, grades, absences, discipline, and some self-reporting. And the way that we should get that data is, of course, from the superintendent, from the equity coordinator, but it starts at the site level. Because principals are the ones who must have equity in mind when they're looking at data from their schools. And in fact, identifying and reviewing data has to be a part of the principal's job, because it's their job to make sure that their schools are succeeding and their students are succeeding. And so getting that information from the principals to the superintendent and the equity coordinator so that those two can actually present to the board is, I think, the best way for that flow of information to actually be used in an important way or in a useful way by the district.
All right, we have our first candidate-specific question. They'll be given 1 minute to respond to it, and no other candidate will be able to reply to that. It's to Ken Dauber. I'll read it out. Obviously, mistakes occur with people, but to the point of data-driving decisions with the board allocating resources properly, I was particularly perplexed and concerned with how the social and emotional pilot program was decided to be implemented last year at the high school level, versus the middle school level, when evidence and anecdotes would support that middle school is the biggest transition of K-12 students' experience. Could you please clarify how this decision was made? Social and emotional learning is the foundation of education, and from the outside it looks like the board did not follow data but fear of suicides. I can restate it, but yes.
I didn't catch the last part of the question. Sorry, and I think it'd be probably helpful to repeat the questions. It's a little complicated.
All right, I'll repeat the last part. Social emotional learning is the foundation of education, and from the outside it looks like the board did not follow the data but for fear of suicides.
For fear of suicides is the last part of it. I'm not sure that I understand the criticism, frankly, but the board and the district are engaged in a project of improving social emotional learning across the district by adopting, as I said, a uniform program K-12. We have a very fragmented program at this point. Different elementary schools have different programs. High schools don't have different programs. And part of that is improving the delivery of that in our high schools with, I think, a focus at gun. And I think that reflects the interest in the gun leadership in particular on marrying that kind of rollout with other changes that they're making in putting teachers into advisory roles and mentoring roles at gun, which is an extremely positive development. So I don't have any issues with the implementation of this. I think it's going well, and I think the goal is a good goal.
All right, so slight clarification, candidates can respond with half a minute if they so desire. We'll start with Mr. Boyd.
Could you please repeat what you just said about
So
half a minute?
candidates will have the opportunity to reply to the answer given by the candidate. You will have half a minute to do so. To the same question, at least.
I just want to read. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate this point because the world is moving so quickly, and we are so stuck in just getting along, getting wellness, getting special education students going, and yet we're spending $1 billion every 4 years, more than that, And there's just got to be a new and better way that we start discussing.
You don't have to respond to it if you don't want to.
I'd just like to try and give my point of view on what the question was asking. And I think that the question was asking why did it get implemented in the high school instead of the middle school, because the data said that the middle school was better. So I don't think that question was answered by Mr. Dauber. So I'd like for that answer.
Do you wish to answer?
My understanding of the implementation of SELF, the social emotional learning at GUN, has unfortunately not had very good feedback from the students. And the comments that I've heard is that it seems like it's a work in progress rather than a fully formed curriculum. That's all I'd have to add. Thank you.
Do you wish to respond?
Very quickly, yeah, social emotional education at the adolescent level is extraordinarily difficult, and it's new for this district. I'm not going to claim I know all the answers, but I would advocate that we pursue the research on how best to achieve that and measure those outcomes, because currently we have dissatisfaction with the SELF program as well as dissatisfaction from the data that we're receiving. So I would advocate for more research in that area about what approach to take going forward.
Do you wish to respond?
Social emotional learning program in this district is key, and we should continue to expand the program to middle school. We should continue to expand it as age appropriate to all of our grades, because it is really the key to developing our students as whole students, as lifelong learners, and building successful members of society, not just successful college applicants. So we should continue to examine the data. We will have growing pains. There are always growing pains with new programs, but this is a good program, and we should be expanding this program.
All right. The next audience question is as follows. The public school education system was made for the industrial age, but the job credentials have changed. Yet the public school system has not. How will you, if elected, change the system to prepare these students for not just careers in the factory, but for modern careers? Mr. Boyd, you have the floor.
The last 15 years has changed everything and has given us the opportunity to make our students, starting today, not tomorrow, into the most efficient learners. Other countries are bringing subjects like chemistry, physics, heavy-duty math down to elementary school, and teaching it in a way that everybody's included, that everybody can really be successful at. And I think it's essential for us to do that.
So I think social emotional learning is very important towards this issue. And I think one of the things that I learned about from this is that we need to recognize that going for a job just because it has the most money isn't necessarily going to make you happy, and that what is important is finding something you're passionate about and that you're interested in, and then building skills off of that. And so I think more access to these type of varied educational systems at a younger age to provide kids with access to something they're interested in so that they can build a good foundation for a career.
Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I'm not sure if our school system was built for the industrial age. I'm a little confused by that. I mean, I feel that we're lucky to have had the public school system that we've had from the beginning. It was the envy of a lot of other nations. At this point, I know a lot of other countries have caught up and have surpassed the United States in different ways, our school system. But in any case, always focusing on the love of learning is really what will, for its own sake, that love of learning for its own sake is really what's important in our school system. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
Computer science education as a high school graduation requirement is a big conversation that's been happening at the state level as well as in our district. One of the things I think we need to work on towards educating our students for future careers is an integrated curriculum so that computer science programming is not necessarily distinct, just as writing is not separated from science or history. We need an integrated curriculum for these technological skills to be nurtured in our students, in particularly with our underrepresented minorities, girls in STEM, as well as students with disabilities. This would include, could include job training for students with high functioning autism and college and career pathway support above and beyond what is currently available.
Mr. Dauber?
I'll mention two things, and I appreciate Stacy's mentioning the computer science graduation requirement, because I was the only board member who supported that change, and I did because there is a substantial gender gap in our computer science, in taking computer science classes. Our female students are taking computer science at a much lower rate than our male students, and that doesn't make sense in a 21st century economy where I think fluency in this area is really a basic skill. And so I think that the way to address that is to require some familiarity in that area. The other is what Alex said about social emotional learning. My work as an engineering manager at Google really has convinced me that a large part of being successful in an environment like that, in addition to technical skills, which are kind of table stakes, is the ability to work well in teams with other people. And so our schools need to be preparing students for that kind of a work environment, and in addition to the basic skills, which they also need.
Mr. Dar?
So I was an English lit major, and there's this great Yeats quote that I love about education. Education is not the filling of the pail, but the lighting of the fire underneath. What do you look for when you're hiring new people? What do we teach our students to prepare them for a future that we don't even know what it's going to look like? Engaged, curious learners who have communication skills, teamwork, who are critical thinkers. These are the very skills that many pockets of innovation in our district instill within our students. Innovative programs like Connections I mentioned, social justice programs, the journalism programs at our high schools. We have a lot of these great programs that do focus on building lifelong learners. So what can we do to make sure that every student has that same opportunity? And what we can do is create a district-wide hub, a committee that is charged with taking those ideas for innovative programs, fleshing them out, and providing institutional support to actually offer them consistently at every school so that all of our students have the same opportunity to access that type of learning, the learning that we need our students to have for the future.
All right, the next audience question is as follows. Do you support limiting the number of AP classes students can take, and if so, what number would that be? Or do you support eliminating AP classes altogether? Mr. Boyd, you have the floor.
I think the AP classes should not be limited. Limiting in general is a very bad idea in this new era of learning. Take computer science, since we've been talking about that. I run a small experimental educational program, and by the second grade, kids are already able to program. So what we really need to do is redesign the curriculums, work with our teachers, work with our wonderful parents and their contributions to PTAC and PI to address how we're going to really give our kids the optimum learning environment. It's so amazing what kids really are ready to learn in the second grade. I mean, when you see them by themselves, a girl put together a 2D plotter, read the manual herself, you realize how far off we are in our curriculums.
Mr. Sharp?
I don't think we should limit. I think APs are a good resource, especially for the minorities, where college is very expensive, and I think it's $70 for an AP test to get credit for a college class. I think this is a very useful resource for the underprivileged. And I think the limiting of AP doesn't do anything good. I think, if anything, it would be an environmental change, that not just taking an AP because it has the letters AP next to it, but being interested in a subject and challenging yourself to learn harder and more difficult material is something we want to encourage. And so that type of learning and expectations to take an AP for that reason, I think, is good.
Ms. Jordan?
Yes, I would not support limiting the number of AP classes. I think that's a family decision, a student decision, to be evaluated by them. I also would not support eliminating AP classes altogether. As Alex said, students do want to challenge themselves, and providing them with that opportunity is important. We also cannot ignore the college admissions process that is present. And colleges do look at the rigor of student schedules, and AP and honors classes is one of the things they do look at as part of the evaluation. Also, one of Palo Alto Unified's goals is to try to encourage historically underrepresented students to take honors and AP classes. So it would go against one of Palo Alto Unified's own goals to try to encourage. As Alex said, they may be helpful for those students to access college. So that would be counterproductive in my view. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
One of the easiest things that we tried in this community was reducing the academic stress and academic pressure in hopes that that would improve student mental health and well-being. And unfortunately, it does not seem to correlate. Even Challenge Success from Stanford says there's no magic number in terms of number of AP classes. So yes, it absolutely must remain a student and a family choice. In addition, there are a number of AP classes in the humanities that we don't offer in our district, maybe because we're in Silicon Valley, but I would advocate looking into offering those advanced placement classes in English and the humanities, as well as in the STEM classes, so that all students can feel valued regardless of their area of interest.
Mr. Dauber?
I don't support and would not vote for limiting AP classes or eliminating AP classes. I do think it's important that students are free to choose classes without risking a workload that is unhealthy and that produces too much stress. So this is one of the reasons that I've been a strong advocate for implementation of the district's homework policy, which limits homework in high school to 15 hours a week, whether you're in AP's classes, honors classes, or other classes. And the point of that is twofold. One is to respect the academic research, which shows that beyond that, the effects are negative for learning rather than positive, but also to enable students to make a choice about what they want to take without worrying that by taking certain classes, they're going to be taking on a crushing workload.
Mr. Dar?
I don't support limiting APs, but I do support the sort of underlying support. So bridging lanes, making sure that students who might not be able to take an AP, for whom an AP course might be too challenging, have the support that they need to actually get to the level where they can make a reasonable choice to take an AP or not. Making sure that we are giving students the same opportunity to take AP courses, not because they want to take a risk, take a gamble to get that extra +1 to their GPA, but because they can take it for the depth of knowledge that APs are there for. So that if they're interested in the subject, truly interested in it, then they're at a level, because they've been supported to that level, where they can take the AP course simply because they want to get depth of knowledge into US history. Not because they need that +1 GPA or because all their friends are taking it. And this requires a really frank conversation about the positives and negatives of APs. It requires a frank conversation not only with our teachers and our administrators, but with our community. Because it is irrevocably tied to the issue of mental health, which is something that nobody in this community is immune from.
All right, the next audience question is as follows. How do you propose to balance the disciplinary exceptions of special needs students as laid out by their IEP with complaints that evoke a Title IX response against said students? And what is the school board's role in these disciplinary issues? Mr. Boyd, you have the floor.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
How do you propose to balance the disciplinary exceptions of special needs students as laid out by their IEP with complaints that evoke a Title IX response against said students? And what is the school board's role in these disciplinary issues? Mr. Boyd?
The school board's role is pivotal. It is to reallocate resources that are currently being misused and misspent into proper supervision, proper classroom experiences, and proper teacher, should we say, education, so that they can in fact deal with these situations. I think the Los Altos case that is recently hitting the news is a case in point. Things happened that were caused by children that have been classified as special needs that ended up in a Title IX complaint. That was allowed to occur because of lack of proper supervision on the playground. And I think that one can draw this kind of conclusion. Right now, it's a wild west in our special ed courses, we're not even thinking of where we're supposed to be, which is beyond all the wonderful things that we didn't do, and provide that sort of support for teachers.
Mr. Sharp?
Can I have the question to look at?
Sure.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so from what I see, I think a big issue here is what someone with special needs is responsible for based on their actions, and whether their actions are actually a part of their disability. And that is important to look at and understand when managing these things. And I think there's not a good source of information regarding this that the district does not look at. And so I think these are issues to look at, and as an IEP, it has to be case by case and based on their needs. And so I think some people need more room to be able to express themselves, and it might not end up in the best situations, but that's a part of their disability, and we can't fault them for that.
Ms. Jordan?
Thanks. Again, this question is similar to one that was before that I mentioned about a misquote and taking something out of context. So I'd like to clarify that again, that the context that I was discussing was students with IEPs should have them properly implemented, and they should receive their services. And school districts that are not properly implementing IEPs and not providing those services are the ones that should be subject to some accountability. And so I would like to work towards seeing that happen. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
It's an interesting question. How do you balance which students' needs are more important, those with a disability or those that are being discriminated based on gender? The answer is not how do you balance it. The answer is yes, of course you balance it. These are all our students, and they all deserve equal protection as well as an equal opportunity to an education in our district. If we return to our core mission and remember that we are here to challenge and provide a supportive educational environment for all students, we won't be having to argue at the federal level about whether a student with disabilities has more or less rights than a student who's discriminated based on gender. Thank you.
Mr. Dauber?
Well, the idea that there's a lot of special education students who are having manifestation hearings that let them off of discipline, I think is a red herring. It's not the case. Certainly not as a result of not having services delivered to them in their IEPs. So I don't see any evidence for that. I think the fact is that students in special education are much more likely to be victims of bullying and sexual harassment and sexual assault than they are to be on the other side of that. You'll remember probably the 2011 case of Turman, which involved a student in special education who was bullied, and the district failed to protect her from that, and she suffered terrible consequences. And ultimately, the federal government decided that the district had violated her civil rights, and I led a campaign, a school board campaign, to fix that system so that that would not happen again. So I think it's really important to remember that special education students in this scenario are much more likely to be the target of bullying and harassment, and that's really the conversation we need to be having about this.
Mr. Dara?
So the question really is about how do you balance compliance with the needs of students? And I think, like Stacy said, you do. But the how is important. When you're talking about compliance, we have to have professionals. So general counsel is really critical to making sure that we as a district are complying with the law, and we're managing other professionals, other lawyers, to make sure that all of the areas, Title IX, special education, are all compliant. But that can create an interesting issue, which is, well, now the district has a lawyer, but what about the parents and the families of the students who we're serving? Who's there to advocate for them? And of course the board is, but another thing that we should be doing is following the footsteps of Sacramento, San Francisco, Oakland, Pasadena, and creating the position of ombudsman. a position that would report directly to the board, not within the district's management structure, and be there as a resource and a guide and an advocate for parents, especially parents of special education students, so that they can navigate what tends to be a very frustrating and a difficult process within the district, and to create more transparency and trust between the parents and the district.
All right. The next audience question is as follows. If elected, will you be willing to learn from other school districts which have been able to close the achievement gap and implement the methods and techniques they have used to make students successful? And as a reminder, we're going to 6, so please submit more questions from the audience. We have time to go through them. Mr. Boyd?
Most definitely, yes. That's my whole argument. But this isn't a local question of what other school districts are doing. It's what lessons do we learn from the world at large. We have China, we have Korea. They have surpassed us. We're probably level 35. They've left us totally in the dust. We have Finland. And the Korean students study something like 14 hours a day, the Chinese a bit less, not far behind, but the Finns are 5th with about 4 to 6 hours of study a day. So we must learn from the way other countries and other schools are doing things. And it's vital for us to stop measuring the past and really start measuring the gap between what we're doing and the future. How can we use our teachers and our curriculum to do in 6 hours what the Finns do? If we get there, we'll be 4th in the world.
Mr. Sharp?
Can you repeat the question?
If elected, will you be willing to learn from other schools which have been able to close the achievement gap and implement the methods and techniques they have used to make students successful?
So this is one of the issues, not just with the school district, but I think Silicon Valley in general, that we're smart, we're the innovative brain of America, and that we should come up with all our own ideas and solutions to all the problems. And I think this type of mentality is unhealthy, and I think a lot of other people have already solved these issues, and it's a lot less effort to look at what someone else has done and learn from it and implement it into our structure than to try and create our own programs. And I think lots of places have better systems. Like New York has a third-party special ed department that is under the state and not the school district, so that they can get fair management and access to their needs. And so I don't think that's necessarily something that we can do as a district, but there's lots of examples out there of places that have done amazing things.
Ms. Jordan?
Yes, to answer the question, certainly be willing to learn from other school districts, or as Mr. Boyd said, willing to learn from other country school systems in terms of closing the achievement gap and many areas that we need to address. The LCAP data that I saw said that only 48% of African Americans in Pelton Unified are meeting A through G requirements upon graduation, and only 49% of Latinos, and only 24.6% of our students with disabilities. 75% of students with disabilities are not graduating meeting A through G requirements. Yet Pelton Unified is a very well-resourced school district, certainly in California. Something needs to be done about that. We need to learn from wherever we can. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
Yes.
Mr. Dauber?
Yes, of course. In fact, I think it was 7 years ago that I went to the school board and pointed out, in response to a letter from the Paoli Math Department that complained about the A to G graduation requirement, that some of our programs, particularly in math and science, were doing less well than similar programs elsewhere. So I think it's critically important that we learn from other districts and other schools. And it's really important that we create incentives for our site leaders and senior leadership to actually go out and do that. So creating accountability and responsibility, and then holding them accountable for those targets. I think that's the important step that we need to take. And I think it's correct, looking elsewhere for solutions is the right thing to do, then we should incentivize them to do that.
Mr. Dara?
Yes, this is kind of a no-brainer question, because the minute that a school district stops serving its students and its families is the minute it stops looking everywhere for solutions to problems that it has. And so, this job, the job of the board member, one that we all are here to hope to try and get, is a job that's all about learning. And it means that each of us in the district is going to have to do more to continue to look outside of itself to see solutions that have already been implemented for problems that we share with other districts. And to make sure that we can look at those solutions and then we can adapt them to be implemented in our own district.
All right. The next audience question is as follows. Would you commit to expanding access to preschool opportunities and the transition in PAUSD to include health and mental screenings? Access to preschool has the greatest effect on eliminating the achievement gap. Mr. Boyd?
I'd go a step much further than just the transitional kindergartens. Of course we need them. Absolutely, they've been proven to be wonderful implements of a healthy mind. They show tremendous improvement in learning outcomes. They help bridge the gap completely because students can actually learn, as in Italy, 100 different languages. If you go to Reggio Emilia, we can immediately have a model where there is art, and instead of having a single teacher, you have kids learning from an artist, a musician, a historian, a scientist, all in the same classroom running around, and they get it. That immersive environment is so incredibly important. And by doing that, we will take a big step towards changing all of our current, shall we say, special needs and also wellness problems that our students face.
Mr. Scharf?
I think access to kindergarten and pre-kindergarten programs are very important, and equal access for everyone is also important. And I think that bringing the education and the interest to subjects to younger audiences is important to create interest in, let's say, chemistry while they're younger, or physics, or something like that. That we might not teach all the details, but we can get them interested in these subjects, because if they're interested when they're young, they can grow up to achieve great things. I think programs like Bill Nye, he inspired a generation of scientists because he brought the education to young kids.
Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I'm certainly in favor of early identification, early intervention in many ways, and in terms of transitional or springboard to kindergarten, of course we need to look at the costs, figure out how to go about it, transportation, childcare issues, but certainly we would be very much interested and eager to see if we can expand access to those. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
I believe the question was regarding health and mental health screening at the pre-K and transitional kindergarten level. And yes, I do support increasing access to pre-K and transitional kindergarten in our district. In particular, those screenings are going to be increasingly important. Trauma-based learning is one of the most up-and-coming areas of pedagogical research, and in our area in particular, with the trauma many of our immigrant students have experienced over the past few years and are probably going to continue to experience, unfortunately. We absolutely need to support these children. They are our youngest and our most vulnerable.
Mr. Dauber?
I'm certainly interested in the question about whether more investment in early childhood education and in preschool is the highest, best use of our next education dollar. I think, but this goes back to a question to an answer that I gave before, which is that the role of the board is not to kind of pick winners and losers based on what we think about the attractiveness of these different options, but it's to look to the staff to present well-reasoned, well-researched analyses about the costs and benefits of these different approaches. And because the question, early education or dyslexia or reading specialists, right? Those are the hard questions, actually, because those involve the trade-offs. And in order to answer those questions, we need to be well-informed and we need to have a research base. And so that's how I would approach a question like that.
Mr. Dara?
So we know that the achievement gap grows from kindergarten to third grade, and afterwards it's very difficult to bridge that gap all the way up to graduation. And so yes, transitional kindergarten and pre-kindergarten, public transitional kindergarten and pre-kindergarten are really critical to bridging that from an early stage, and really preventing it from happening in the first place. The issue is, right now we have the Young Fives program, which is fantastic. But somebody brought up to me at a previous event that there's a mandatory volunteering requirement there. And that's really problematic, because the families who need pre-kindergarten the most, the students who need it the most, are the students who will then tend to be cut out of it because of a mandatory volunteer requirement, which is very difficult for parents who work full-time and can't make it to volunteer at pre-kindergarten. So expanding transitional kindergarten, pre-kindergarten out to all the elementary school sites, so that there is that institutional support for transitional kindergarten at every school, is extremely critical to making sure that as a public school system we are providing the same opportunity to every student.
All right, the next question is as follows. Based on the last negotiation with the teachers union and the controversy over salaries, what would you as board member do to ensure that negotiations are fair, equitable, and ensure that there is a check and balance system process for evaluating staff performance that is attached to student outcomes, especially as it relates to HUR and SPED student successes? Mr. Boyd?
In 1 minute to tackle this.
Yeah,
Would it help to just, once you're finished, pass the card along?
I can do that. Based on the last negotiation with the teachers unions and the controversy over salaries, what would you as a board member do to ensure that negotiations are fair, equitable, and ensure that there is a check and balance system process for evaluating the staff performance that is attached to student outcomes, especially as it relates to HUR and SPED student successes?
I want to start out by thanking our teachers. And I think that our teachers do a fantastic job. They are tremendously motivated. And I'm saying this, I've been in Barron Park as a parent, Addison as a parent, this wonderful school here as a parent, Terman as a parent. I've never been disappointed in the teachers. What I'm disappointed in is the working relationship that exists to extract the value of the teachers. The teachers, in fact, probably, given our own expenses, are underpaid, and we should be raising the question of how do we get affordable housing for our teachers. But most importantly, the question is, how do we reorganize teaching so that the teachers are responsible for the curriculum, responsible for the students? And by doing this, we will be taking steps that, for example, Finland has found so incredibly cost-effective. Trust is how I would deal with teachers.
Mr. Sharp?
I think this is a really good issue because I like a lot of my teachers, but if you've ever been to school, you have to admit there are some teachers that are better than others. And from my understanding, the raises are uniform, that all teachers, no matter what their performance are, get the same raise. And I think giving exceptional teachers grants and sabbaticals for their work and encouraging the excellent teaching from our best staff and incentivizing them, like most workplaces have bonuses. And this type of system works really well in the workplace, and this is another idea that we can might not be from a different school district, but we can learn from another community of workers that this is a great program.
Ms. Jordan?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a very interesting question, and I think it brings up a lot of very good points. Having a check and balance system tied to student performance would be very valuable. I think we all know that that's not what we have in place. In terms of negotiation, of course, we'd want to look at make things comparable to the market for our teacher salaries. We want to make sure that they're well compensated so they can support our students well. We also want to make sure that the student performance that we're receiving for the value, the compensation that we're paying, is also comparable to other comparable districts. and we'd want to examine all that data. And particularly, of course, we'd want to look at the indicators as pointed out for the historically underrepresented as well as the special education students to see what the comparable performance of our students in those areas are as compared to other comparable districts, as well as to the state and the nation. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
The teacher union negotiations with the district and the controversy that occurred, as I understand it, I spoke to every member of the current board, including Mr. Dauber, on this, and as I understand it, it was a bit of a communication breakdown between the staff and the board, and that now we have a new superintendent and a large amount of new staff at the district office, and that we don't anticipate having those communication breakdowns again. The labor union negotiation process, built into that process, is to get a fair deal negotiated between the teachers and the district. And penalizing teachers for low-performing grades based on the student demographic makeup at their schools is not effective. Rather, increasing support for things like co-teaching and scaffolding for HUR students and special needs students is effective at improving those outcomes.
Mr. Dauber?
Well, I'll briefly comment on the history. I opposed a teacher contract because I thought it was too expensive. It turned out to be too expensive. It put the district in a budget deficit of $4.5 million. The district staff, senior district staff, failed to notify the teachers union of the desire to cancel the last year of that teacher's contract. I don't think that was a communication error. I think that was a management failure, and ultimately it led me to call for the superintendent to resign, which he did. In terms of negotiations, I would separate out the teachers and classified staff, with whom it is very difficult to make changes and kind of structural changes that we're talking about, and senior staff, for whom it is possible to tie their compensation to performance and to define that performance in terms of the things that we've been talking about. I led the board in rejecting the linkage between teacher raises and senior staff raises, the so-called Me Too raises, and we are now designing a compensation system that is performance-based for precisely the reasons that we're talking about.
Mr. Dara?
One quick point with regards to the teacher salaries that was mentioned in the question. This was really more than a bit of a communication breakdown, it was a compliance breakdown. And I say compliance a lot, and it's not just because I'm an attorney, it's because we don't have an attorney, we don't have a general counsel. And that's really critical for a district that is a $250 million a year organization. Compliance is key. Moving on to the next part of the question, when we're talking about evaluation, teachers really need to have swift and actionable feedback. That's not just so that the teachers are serving their students well, but it's so that they're learning what they're doing right and what they could be doing better to make sure that we have constant evaluations flowing from the teacher upwards to their instructional supervisor and so on, so that teachers have the opportunity to always be changing their learning. And that is something that we can bring to the table in contract bargaining negotiations, and it's something we should.
All right. The last audience question we'll be taking is as follows. How does or should the school district prepare our students to be better educated and conscious citizens, especially in our changing world? Mr. Boyd?
Could you please hand us the word? Thank you.
I think we need to do a lot of work. I don't think that I can say yes to either of those two options. I think that we need to chart a new way of doing it before it's charted for us. The amount of money that we're spending per student allows us to really deliver a far more efficient means of education that will allow all of the implementations of what we're calling special education and wellness, in addition to reviving an educational approach that originated something like 600 years ago. But I just want to end the last question with one comment. We are all special education students or people. Albert Einstein, any number of scientists of great renown today are all special education. And we need to start thinking in completely different terms. And the law has changed, so we need to expand to comply with Every Student Succeeds Act.
Mr. Shar?
So, I think, as I've stated before, the most important thing to the workplace and to society and to any interactions you're going to have is social emotional learning. Empathy and compassion and understanding the other person you're talking to have a better communication skills is going to be important, whether it's at work and communicating in a job, whether it's a relationship and communicating between you and your partner, or with your family, or with any stranger you talk to. That these are skills that are very useful and that are very important in today's society.
Ms. Jordan?
Thank you. I agree that I think the district should attempt to prepare our students to be not only better educated, but also conscientious citizens. And I suppose I would look to the district and all who are involved as setting a good example of that by adhering to laws, by supporting our students, by respecting our hard-earned tax dollars, by managing them responsibly, spending them responsibly, and by attempting to achieve academic excellence for all of our students. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
Education for future careers when our students leave the district is more than just being prepared for the high-tech world. Being engaged citizens is critical, which also brings up what I spoke about earlier about increasing our advanced course offerings in the humanities, not just in the STEM fields, so that our students feel empowered to use their voices, that we have more comparable programs across the high schools, so that the journalists from Tally who interview us, the students from Gunn who have a much smaller journalism program, also feel that they have a voice to ring in on how their district is won. And yes, it comes back to making caring common, which is the report that came out of Harvard about 2 years ago, and teaching empathy as the very basis of education.
Mr. Dauber?
Producing conscientious citizens is one of the fundamental goals of public education. It's one of the great benefits of the public education system is an educated citizenry. And so we are part of that process. Students now, I think, are facing some of the largest challenges of any generation of students. Climate change, a democracy that seems to be not working as well as it needs to in order to face those challenges. Social media, there's just an enormous range of challenges that our students are facing. And what I've seen is that they are eager to get involved in all of those challenges and eager to get involved in their school district. And the role of the board, I think, is to be responsive to that. So for example, some students came on Tuesday and complained about the effect of dress codes in middle school on humiliating our female students. And this, we took great care to be visibly responsive to that concern and to give direction to the superintendent to follow that up. And in part to educate students that when you step up and take action, then something happens.
Mr. Dara?
So this is the goal of a public education system. You know, what are we doing, not just to build successful college applicants, but to really build successful members of society? And the social emotional learning programs are a great start, and that's just curriculum. But really what we can do more of is engaging our students in district governance. Here's a prime example of civic engagement that we have in this community that is so passionate about education, and providing our students with the opportunity to get involved would be critical to really building that sense of civic engagement, civic responsibility. And we do a fine job of it, but we could do more. I've workshopped a ton of ideas with current students on what we could do to create sort of online forums to present district issues to students in a way that they feel comfortable responding or discussing issues that aren't necessarily coming to board meetings to talk about them. It can be very intimidating to do that. And so expanding those forums, lowering the barriers for access for students to actually engage in district issues would be a critical way to really build that civic engagement in all of our students.
All right, and with that, we conclude our audience questions. Candidates will now give a 1.5-minute closing statement in the reverse order which they were in the reverse order of their opening statements. So with that, Mr. Dara, you have 1.5 minutes for your closing statement.
A lot of the questions that you all asked today really had to do with what is our vision for the future for PAUSD? And that's a heavy, heavy question, right? How do we build a system that prepares our students for a really uncertain future? What do we do to empower our students to carve their own paths to success? What do we do to make sure that our district recognizes the diversity of thought and the diversity of skill in all of our students and recognizes them as strengths, empowers our students to really reach their individual potential? Again, these are very difficult questions, but that is the focus of what the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of education in PAUSD must look like. We have a lot of great ideas, and we've shared a lot of ideas up here on how to do that, how to turn those ideas into reality. But it requires execution. It requires us to actually turn those ideas into a reality for the families that we serve. And that's something that I have experience with. You know, I've dedicated my life to fighting for fairness, equity, and justice for families. I'm a litigator, and I have deep experience with compliance, with fiscal management, the very things you need to make sure that your good ideas are turning into realities for the families that we're serving. I have experience with governance. I've worked with the government at the county level, the state level, the federal level, and have been involved in educational governance as well at the state level. I have professional experience and a lived experience in the district. And that's really what's necessary to make sure that not just our current students, but all our students going forward are going to be well served, and that all our schools are going to offer them the best opportunities for success.
Mr. Dauber.
Thank you for attending and listening. It has been a great honor for me to serve the students of this district for the last 4 years, and I hope to have the opportunity to keep doing that. I'm really pleased that, as the Weekly said, the district has made strong progress over the last 4 years. In their view, which I think is correct, the district is in the best shape that it's been for the last 10 years. This is the strongest school board in decades. And that is because we have made steady progress across a range of issues. Funding a special education plan, turning around a Title IX compliance situation so that we're now a model district K-12, implementing full-day kindergarten, working on a K-12 social-emotional learning curriculum. Really progress across a range of areas. Are there still issues? Absolutely. That's why I'm running for re-election, because there's still more work to be done. But as you listen to us, listen for not just problems, but also listen for solutions. Listen for concrete contributions that candidates have made to the life of the community and the district. And I hope that after you do that, that you will support my re-election in November. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland.
Thank you to CAC and PAS for bringing us together for this forum this afternoon. Thank you also to Sid and the debate and journalism students from both high schools, who are the most civically engaged teenagers and are hugely impressive. I've had a great privilege of getting to know them over the course of this campaign. Thank you also for Mr. Dauber's leadership on the board, for shining a light on the support needed for special needs students and for student health and well-being, as well as equity and civil rights. We've made great progress in those areas. I am the most experienced candidate, having served at the site level of the Site Council of supporting equity in education for all students at both elementary and high school level, as well as allocating PI dollars at the middle school and high school level, as well as serving at the SELPA level, which is all 4 school districts combined. I look forward to your vote in November, such that we can work in a collaborative way and move away from the adversarial nature that our district is so sadly known for, and work towards a more collaborative approach so that all students, parents, families, and teachers will feel welcome and supported in our district.
Thank you. Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you again to PTAC, to the CAC, and to PAS for hosting this forum today. Thank you to the PTA and Green for hosting us. In closing, I'd like to say yes, we do have a lot to be proud of in our district. Great teachers, great community support, great facilities, and of course, our children, our great students. For some of us up here, these are our children in the school district, and we want to provide them with an excellent education and an excellent experience in our schools. To do this, our school district needs oversight from our school board and from our community to make sure it stays on the right path, making sure to put our students first and foremost, but also to manage our finances responsibly, to be transparent and accountable to our community, while working at the same time to provide academic excellence for all of our children. And change is needed on the school board to do that. I hope to earn your vote to make that change. Thank you.
Mr. Sharp?
PAUSD has not made enough progress in the achievement gap of students with disabilities and underrepresented minorities. Palo Alto is known for its excellence. It should be a leader in this area. We should not be comparing ourselves to other California schools, but rather other public schools throughout the U.S. who do a much better job. The law says that students with disabilities are entitled to free and appropriate public education. But why does PAUSD consider what I think oftentimes is the lowest minimum bar to be appropriate for students with disabilities? We would never consider telling high-achieving neurotypical students that we don't offer AP or honors classes because we provide an appropriate education by just meeting the state standards. Let's be the leader in providing excellent education to all, not the leader in Title IX complaints.
Mr. Boyd?
Thank you to everybody. I think Confucius had a maxim which he was all in favor of learning, but I won't say it in Chinese, but he said learning without thinking leads to danger. And we would take heed of this because we are focusing on standardized testing, learning without thinking. And what I wanted to say is, I wanted to say how much I admire our own democracy, and this is the essential role that education plays, strengthening our society, our democracy. We are the inheritors of the Athenian democracy, and dialogue is the most important attribute, I think, of Socrates and his endless addiction to dialogue. We must communicate among all facets of the school. You know, vision is absolutely essential. Ideas, dedication to detail, and numbers. But, and this is where I differ with many of my colleagues, the board has a fiduciary duty to communication and interaction on campus with parents and students and teachers. They cannot, should not wait for these people to come to them. Just thank you to all our leaders, especially CAC and PTAC and PI.
All right, that concludes the debate for today. As some lasting thank yous, thank you to the CAC, PTAC, the PAC, Green, and the PTA for hosting this debate. Thank you to Sachate for being an excellent timekeeper. Candidates will be outside with their tables. You'll have 50 minutes to meet and greet them and ask them questions about their campaigns. As such, thank you for coming.